right, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. We're just going to get started since it's about 7:34 on my clock. We've got a pretty full house, which is really wonderful to see. As you all know, most of you know, we're here to celebrate the launch of Arinze Ifeakandu's first book, God's Children Are Little Broken Things. We're really excited to welcome him to our stage along with Brandon Taylor, who will be interviewing him. So you're in for a very excellent evening tonight. Tonight's event is co-presented by A Public Space, where Ifeakandu was a writing fellow in 2015. My name is Jean. I'm the events coordinator here. We've been working on this for a really long time, so it's really thrilling to have you all be here with us. Before I turn things over to our readers tonight, just a couple of housekeeping things. Please turn off or silence your cell phones if you haven't already. We are also recording this event tonight, so just keep that in mind as you report yourselves. Please keep your masks on the entire time you're in the store. This is still a policy that we are holding in place for the safety of everyone here and our staff. We have signed books for sale at the register, both Brandon's and Arinze's, and Arinze will also personalize books after the event. He'll be right here. You can come up and have him personalize the signature for you if you so desire. Without further ado, our interviewer for this evening is Brandon Taylor. Brandon Taylor is the author of the novel Real Life, which was a New York Times Editor's Choice and shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize. He's also the author of the story collection Filthy Animals, which is a big staff favorite here, which won the Story Prize, and he lives in New York City. He will be speaking with our featured author, Arinze Ifeakandu. Arinze was born in Kano, Nigeria in 1995. An AKO Kane Prize for African Writing Finalist and a Public Space Writing Fellow. He is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. His work has appeared in A Public Space, Guernica, The Kenyan Review, One Story, and Redemption Song and Other Stories, the Kane Prize for African Writing 2018. God's Children Are Little Broken Things is his first book, and he lives in Tallahassee, Florida. God's Children Are Little Broken Things is his first book. In these 9 exhilarating stories of queer love in contemporary Nigeria, Ifeakandu explores with tenderness and grace the fundamental question of the heart. Can deep love and hope be sustained in spite of the dominant expectations of society and great adversity? So you're in for something very special tonight. First, we'll have a few words from the managing editor of A Public Space book, Megan Cummins. Then Arinze will be reading from the book, Brandon will join him in conversation, and then you'll all have your chance to ask questions and shower them with praise after that. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Megan, Arinze, and Brandon.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm so thrilled to be here with Greenlight Bookstore for the launch of God's Children Are Little Broken Things by Arinze Ifeakandu. I'm Megan Cummins, the managing editor of A Public Space Books, as Jean said. And this is just such a special moment for A Public Space, so I wanted to take just a moment to say a few words about Arinze and A Public Space. You might know A Public Space as a literary magazine that's been publishing since 2006, but in 2019 we launched a book imprint. And Arinze's book is the very first book by a debut author that we are publishing. And what makes it even more special is that Arinze was one of our 2015 Writing Fellows. So this feels like the culmination of a long and really special relationship with Arinze, and what we have now is this gorgeous collection, God's Children Are Little Broken Things. So I just want to thank Greenlight again for hosting us. Thank you so much, Brandon Taylor, for moderating the conversation tonight. And thank you, Arinze, for writing this gorgeous collection. I will turn it over to you.
Is it green, the mic pack?
Yeah.
Okay. You should be good.
So good to see all of you. I don't know. I'm kind of shy, but I'm also very happy. Good to see see familiar faces, my friends, Santiago, Ada, Isa, yeah, Matthew, I'm so glad to see you here. I'm just so happy. I'm just going to read. And I'm going to read from like one of my favorite stories in this collection. Every story gets my favorite. But it's like the only story written in the first person. And I wonder why.
Are we having audio problems? I feel like this might be
Hey. Alright, so the title of the story is What the Singers Say About Love. I had seen Kayode once before, in first year, having a bath downstairs. His wet body an assemblage of small perfect muscles. His ass firm and flawless. His dick, oh my God. I noticed him in the way that one notices something beautiful but unattainable, and did not see him again until second year, when I went with my friend Ekene to a campus celebrities bash. He was going from group to group, talking. I think I'm just going to stand here. He was going from group to group, talking, swaying to the music, and I only recognized him as someone I had seen before, but did not know, until I heard someone say his name. Ekene had talked about him a few times in the past, this handsome boy who made beautiful music. I sat in a corner of the room, watching people dancing, thinking how happy their lives were in that moment, how tomorrow this senseless joy would be absent. His eyes caught mine watching him. He looked puzzled, a look that, with most boys, usually turned into aggression. I glanced away. When I looked back up, he was staring at me. I smiled, unsure of how to read and return that brazen stare. He smiled back, whispered something to a girl who was deep in conversation with Ekene, and she nodded, a quick, distracted nod. He strode toward me, holding a can of Star, which he placed on the table as he sat opposite me. I noticed for the first time the tiny gleaming silver stud in his right ear. "You seem to be having so much fun," he said, smiling. He had the whitest teeth. "You are teasing me," I said. "Oh no, I'm not," he said, beating his arms innocently, and for a moment I believed him. But then he smiled wildly and asked, "Why aren't you dancing?" "I can't dance," I said, shrugged. He arched his eyebrow. The song playing now was loud, was full of clanging metal, of booming drums, and the dancers had gone completely mad, jumping and shaking their heads like people about to burst into incantations. When he spoke, he had to shout, "Everybody can dance." "Not me," I said. "I dance like a girl." "You what?" He leaned in and I leaned in, my lips to his ear. His hair had a distant scent of something sweet and fruity. I imagined him in the bathroom, his head crowned in leather. Then I remembered his body, the muscles moving across his back and arms as he washed himself vigorously, and I felt a little guilty. It had been different seeing him down there among a dozen other boys, having their baths outside as I brushed my teeth, each person a feature of money. Now it seemed like a small violation. "I dance like a girl," I said into his ear. He looked at me weird. "You dance like a girl, and so?" He said, squeezed his face thoughtfully, standing up. Standing up, he held out his hand. "What?" I said, confused and a little excited. And he said, "Trust me," smiling a playful, wicked smile. He led me to the middle of the room where he started swaying his shoulders. "God, Kayode," I said, covering my face with my hands. "Love me, love me, love me, love me." The speakers boomed, and he sang along, holding out his hand toward me. "Soma fimisile, oh, I like it here." A girl laughed, yelled, "Dance, dance," someone else responded, and soon it was a chant, "Dance, dance, dance." "You see," Kayode said, taking my hand and twirling me around. "God, kill me now," I thought, and moved my hips. Yes, people cheered. And if not for these shouts of affirmation, I might have collapsed from the exposure. Closing my eyes, I let the music take hold of my body, waves of pleasure rippling through me. This was what people meant when they said dancing was fun, I thought. This absolute surrender. When the music stopped, I opened my eyes and there was Kayode Bimi, Ekene cheering, the dance floor drowned by laughter and applause. I shook Kayode's hand and he pulled me into a manly hug, our shoulders clashing. I need some air, I said, as the next song began. God, me too, he said. He followed me to the balcony, where a few people had carved a space for themselves to smoke and talk. The street below was dark, electric poles watching over the closed shops, and there was some breeze, and the music blasting inside was muffled, Kayode having shut the door behind us. I took a dramatic breath, saying how good the air was on my face. I felt happy, yet anxious and exposed, a confusing meld. I had noticed a few guys leave when Kayode led me to the dance floor. Now I was sure that they had left in disgust and anger. Those had to be the only reasons. I have to go home, I said. He looked puzzled, concerned. Are you okay? Yes, I said. I'm just not a party person. I'm exhausted already, but I'm glad you made me dance. It made my night, he said, eyes alight, and then looked at me, serious. I should probably see you off. You don't want to jam bad guys walking home alone. This is their time. I texted Ekene, walking home with Kayode, see you tomorrow on. We walked downstairs and out the gates together, down the dusty road. The house is grey and fallen. So how come you know my name, he said. I was a bit surprised when you said it on the dance floor. I glanced at him. Walking side by side, I noticed I was taller. You're kind of famous, mister. He laughed. You know, I used to see you in the hostel. I would think to myself, who is that guy? I have to know his name. I felt a small, sweet stirring in my chest. Why didn't you talk to me, I said. Because you always had this unfriendly look on your face, and you walk really fast. He looked serious. I laughed, slowing down my steps. He laughed too. At Hilltop Gate, a group of guys were seated on the corridor of a closed shop, smoking weed, and I reminded myself to put on my manly walk and my manly face. He called out to them, my manchi, and they called back, Baba, and I felt terribly grateful for his presence. We walked out of the gate, making small talk, little rocks crunching under our sneakers, onto Cartwright, the tarred road illuminated by lights beaming from hostel windows. We walked toward the senior staff quarters, took the thin path leading to the boys' quarters, the ground a carpet of dead leaves. At my door, I said, thank you. And he said, yeah, sure. I looked at his feet and then at my face, a peculiar shyness rising into his eyes.
Can you hear me? How about now? Better? Better? Meh? Good. Okay. We can do better than meh, probably. Here, maybe? I don't know. I'll just talk into my shoulder. Arinze, that was amazing. I love that moment at the end of the story because I feel like it's so, at the end of your reading, because I feel like it so encapsulates what your stories are about, which is like a sexy moment, and then like a sad moment, and then like a moment of like queer love under a harrowing regime of like surveillance and superstition. And I don't know, the endings of these stories always made me go, no, that can't be the end. No, let them love and know each other in better, deeper ways. So I guess my first question is maybe about endings and the way that you write these kind of lyrical, poetic, beautiful encapsulations of what it is to be lonely but also hopeful. How do you do your endings, Arinze?
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, I think like when I think of endings, I don't think of them consciously as endings, but I think like when I write, I'm writing towards a feeling, and I'm saying, okay, this is the large feeling of the story, and this is how I want, or this is the response I want to get from readers. This is the response I want to get. Like when I'm reading it, this is what I want to feel, and I think, like, you know, when we write stories or when we read stories, like everything that moves towards the ending, contributes to that feeling. But in many ways, I think the endings are the things that give us like the real, like yeah. So when I think of endings, I think of things. And I also like endings that have a sense of like, of continuity, which I feel like when I've written a story, I want it to be that I have like not just written a story, but have presented a sense of the life, or given a sense of the life, and endings that feel like too finely closed or too finely like resolved do not like really feel, because I don't think anything in life is fully resolved or like neatly tied together.
Yeah, I feel like that's what makes your stories feel so much like really great cinema or like a really great poem, is that sense of opening. And it reminded me of this really harrowing thing that once happened to me. I was in a workshop with Justin Torres, and he was really big on endings, and he kept being, at the end of every workshop, he'd be like, do we think that this ending is open or closed? And for the people who are writing stories, he'd be like, your ending is open. I don't think that's a good move for a short story. It should be closed, right? And he said that to me, and he was like, I don't think you're a story writer. I think you're a novelist. Novelists open their endings, and short story writers close them. And I got to thinking about all the short story writers I love, and I feel like this is like not true, actually. Like Alice Munro opens her endings. Garth Greenwell, his endings are so open. Chekhov, of course, opens his endings. And so I guess, I don't know, that's what I love so much about your endings, is that they do open onto like a larger life, or like a larger sense of the world. Or you know that these characters are going to like wake up the next day and have to continue on, often in quite harrowing circumstances for some of your characters, but others, they're going to get to continue on in love and go out and find that thing that they need somehow. I'm curious about how you come to your story. So you've mentioned already that you are interested in feeling and capturing a feeling, but I'm curious how you come to a story, or like how you come to those feelings that you're trying to capture in a story. Where does a story begin for you?
Yeah, that's interesting, because it varies from story to story, but I think with this collection, mostly the stories came firstly, so this story, The Dreamer's Litany, I remember I knew I wanted to write a story about the father who wanted the best for his child, who had grown up poor, and I wanted to capture like what that reality was, or what that looked like. But I didn't know how to enter into it. But then I was visiting my uncle in Abuja, and there was this guy who sold like things just close by. I think he was from Chad or Nigeria. I can't remember. I think it was Chad, but when I went back last year, my auntie said no, it was Nigeria, and I'm like, but so I'm not sure. But of blessed memory now, he's late. But we'd have like long conversations, and like I would be bored at home, and I would just go to his shop and we'd sit down and talk. And like nothing about his biographical life inspired the story, but just like the kind of person he was, his character, his look, just sort of the story I've been struggling to enter, I suddenly found myself in it. And that's like the thing with a lot of my stories. I have like these ideas or these things I want to explore, and I have like, sometimes I have like the imagination, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is going to happen and that is going to happen, but I'm not always quite sure until I have found like, I guess, that news?
Yeah, the secret way in some ways. And so once you've gotten your hook into the story, what do you do then? Do you just sort of follow the character? Do you sort of just let the vibe permeate? I feel like in my own stories, I'm always just like letting the vibe percolate. I'm just like sadness for 18 pages. And then, I need an ending. Let's change the emotion. How do you balance? Yes, oh my God, balance. So important in a story. For every sad, depressive gay man in a bathroom, there needs to be a moment of beauty or grace, is what I am told by the elders of the story writing. But I'm curious how you sort of find your way through a story.
Yeah, so like I think it's quite like similar to what you just described, which is vibes. Let's get this done, but also like you know, the writer I admire a lot once said that that what they do is that they just write it. I don't say like they write nonsense. At first they just like sit down and they just like write everything, and then during the revision they do the real writing, which and I tried that and that never worked. And for me, it's like once I get into the story, each sentence has to lead to the next sentence. Like I have to get a sense of the rhythm. I need to hear it. I have to. That's how I have fun when I write. Right? The sentence needs to sound like right to me, and the emotions. Like how do I want to like how do I capture what someone is feeling in the most realistic way? Do I do it through like images or like just? I'm just like, that's what I'm thinking. I just want it to be as real as possible every moment. And that like sort of, that's how the story goes. So,
Yeah, I think it's very similar for me. Although I am really big on writing all the nonsense, I used to really struggle with finishing drafts, and a friend of mine was like, why, like, it's just a draft, just like write it and then fix it in post. And so that's what I do. I'm just like, get it out and then have total faith and revision. But it is, I think it's so important that you sort of build a system, and sometimes that's the rhythm of the language, and sometimes it's the sensibility of the voice of the character, and that you build that system at the outset, and then you can just like follow it. You just sort of let it do what it will do and organize what it will organize. But language is so important to your stories, and I think it makes total sense that you follow the language, because in these stories there are all these like moments of real surprise and revelation. There's so many moments where your characters do things that like don't make sense to me at the moment, and then 5 pages on they'll have like a revelation, and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad they made that terrible choice. I'm so glad that their mother was really mean to them, because now we have this great sentence. But I am curious about the role of revision. So once you've gotten the draft of the story and you go back and revise, are you looking for those moments where you can sort of get more truth out of it, or do you just get the draft done and it is done and pristine and you never have to send your stories to therapy like I do?
Are you serious? Like, but yeah, so what I do is I send like to at least with the collection, what I did mostly was I'll write a story, and when I was done with it, I would read it, and like if I enjoy it, I would like change a few things here and there, make sure the sentences are at least to my own taste, like I love them, and then I send it out to some of my friends, and then I get their feedback, and after I get their feedback, I like look at the feedback, and I revise what needs to be revised, and then I send out to like magazines, and so that's how I did like story after story, but then like and then we then have the editing, which is also like different, and it's like it's an experience of its own. You suddenly like realize you just know yourself better, because you also know your stories better.
Yeah, and when you're putting it into a book, that's like a whole other set of pressure and constraints. So, it's one thing for the story to like, there's the version of the story that you first write, and then there's a version of the story that you revise, and then there's perhaps the version that you publish in a magazine, and then when you have to put them all together and you suddenly have like 5 stories with sad and or dying parents, you're like, well, now I've got to make some choices.
Yeah. I actually had that like anxiety at some point, like while working on the collection, because you're working like this is massive like materialist women in Nigeria, and like okay, at some point I was thinking, am I repeating myself? Am I doing the same thing over and over again? I remember like the earlier around like, when I just started the collection, I had sent like a few stories to someone, and they said, oh my god, your characters are dying. and I was like, okay, I don't know. I guess they're just fun. Like, but I think in those early years, that was also like the way I knew how to end the story. I guess like if for something to end, someone has to go. But the older I got, like of course I found like other ways of ending stories. But yeah,
It's so funny. I think that you heard many knowing laughs in the audience. I too did that. And in undergrad, I put together a short story collection and sent it to my friend, and he's like, "Why does everyone die when they're 25? Why is everybody in this book like?" I'm like, "That's just what it is." Like, you know, I had seen gay movies. That's what happened in all of them. Sometimes surprise, death. But yeah, I mean, that fear of repeating yourself is so we can perhaps talk about that. But you know, something that Roxane Gay once said is that when you find that your stories start to feel repetitive, that can be a bad thing, but it can also just mean that you found your subject and that you found your voice. And so then the challenge becomes, you know, finding ways to surprise yourself within, you know, the sort of milieu that you carved out for yourself, you know. Like, I don't know if you've read the Big Book of Cheaper Stories, but there are some repeats in there. Many repeats. But I guess, curious about your great subject, which to my mind is boys in love, Arinze. You love a story about a boy in love. You love a story about a boy who's been blinded by love, all kinds of love. I guess, like, why do you feel that you are drawn to stories about boys in love, and how does it feel to be writing contemporary love stories?
it feels absolutely amazing. I mean, like, so yeah, so I have begun like writing these love stories, like not these particular stories that have been published, but like just love stories with boys in love. When I was in high school, I remember I used to write in notebooks, and my classmates would like. In primary school, my classmates would actually like buy notebooks so I could write stories in them and then give it to them, and then they would take home it's theirs.
Their first books!
And like in high school, what I did was like I write it in my own notebooks, and I used to give it to my mom, my uncle. But then the moment I began to write queer characters, like gay characters, because I needed to like, you know, I wasn't seeing it in movies. I needed like something that felt real to me, and felt like, you know, basically I wanted to have fun reading something. And I began to write, you know, these queer characters. My mom didn't say anything. I didn't show it to her. Like, I just immediately stopped showing her the stories. I stopped showing my uncle the stories. For my peers, like, you know, I'll show it to my. Okay, I'll show it to my peers.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
I'll send it. Like, my peers would read it. So for me, love has always been a subject. Love has always been a subject. I come from a very loving family. I have very loving friends. And I believe, you know, that romantic love also is there. So, yeah.
Arinze, that is so beautiful. Because, like, in a lot of queer fiction, like, that is not the case. I mean, I think that one thing that your book demonstrates time and time again is, and sometimes to heartbreaking effect, is how deeply your characters believe in love and how deeply they have felt loved. And often what complicates the dynamics in these stories is that these characters have been genuinely deeply loved by their family, and suddenly queerness enters into it, and that has complicated things in about a dozen different ways. And so then they're torn between, you know, this erotic, romantic love, this kind of queer love, but also this sort of deep bone love of family. And I feel like that's only possible because your characters so deeply believe in love. And I feel like I felt that even from the first story of yours that I read when we were, you know, in MFA school together. I feel like I read that story and I was like, oh, this is a person who believes in love. And I wish I wish I believed in love to this capacity. And I think that that's like really beautiful, but it must also be complicated, right? Because love is always this, you know, it's kind of an invitation to get struck by lightning over and over. So I guess, like, could you talk a little bit more about the ways that love manifests in these characters' lives, and love is like a complicating force in your fiction?
Yeah, so like, you know, but I don't know. But like love, when I think of love, like with the stories, you know, like the idea at first was, you know, I'm writing these stories like these boys are all in love. But then you begin to, like, you know, I find that when they say that a story speaks for itself in many ways, as you're writing, you're like, because these characters exist in a society, they exist like in relation to one another, they exist in a, you know, in a time, right? And so like, I guess like from a child's point of view, my idea of love is like this perfect thing. It's like, oh yeah, you know, you're going to always love someone, and they're always going to love you back. And people are always going to be kind, and people are always going to be nice. But like, you know, as you begin, but you know, you live life, and you know that's not true, and that's not always the case. And you know, while writing the stories, life began to, you know, show itself. And so like, I guess like for me, I had to also grapple with the question of like, what happens when, like when, for example, I remember having a conversation with God. I had written a story, like, you know, it's like the collection is a different story set in America, and it was this like Nigerian guy with this like, I think it arranges a workshop, and so it's like this white character, and God was like, Arinze, this story doesn't have like the same, you know, this kind of like complicated, like basically grace that the other stories have. I was like, well, I guess I haven't learned to love it.
Could you say that again? Could you, for the audio feed, could you say that again, please?
I said like, I guess I haven't learned to love this movie yet, because like, you know, back home, though I grew up like with like, you know, people who were homophobic, right? In many ways, like a lot of the people who grew up around me, I found that their homophobia came from ignorance, and the moment they knew I was gay, like I began to see changes in them. And those changes were enormous, so that like someone who was like, oh, gays are going to hell today, a year later this person is like, how dare you talk bad about my gay friend? It's like, and like, I guess like, you know, because I grew up with them, I knew them, I understood them, I had more patience. In America, I don't think I have that much patience. So I guess like I'm just answering that same question of love, right? And maybe if I get to know Americans more, I might have but yeah, so like that's yeah, that's how I think about it.
Oh, I love that. That's incredible. What I can say is that, you know, no, it does not help to know them. It does make it does not, alas. It's very complicated. I love that, Arinze. I mean, and it is true that, like, your story, you know, like, I feel like there's this sort of prototypical kind of gay story in which, like, these two gay dudes exist in a vacuum, and then, like, somebody has a homophobic uncle or aunt, and then the whole relationship is destroyed or whatever. And I feel like in your stories, like, your stories often deal with people who are queer, but who are sort of discovering it for themselves. They're like, oh, I like men. Wow, I guess that explains that experience I had in grade school. And their queerness is often like a revelation to them, but it's like, I never feel your hand on the back of their heads, like forcing them down. It's, you allow them that grace to sort of find out who they are and to learn to interpret themselves and their feelings. And often the drama, like, yes, they're sort of they're under this regime of suspicion, yes, but often the drama is because, like, as people, there's some fundamental understanding between them, just first and foremost as humans who have different communication styles. And I'm thinking especially in the first story in the book, where it's just, I think, like, very sexy. I love a seduction narrative, but it's also so complicated, because normally the person who's got the hang-up about the kissing is the straight guy, right? And here it's very different. It's a different thing. I guess, like, can you talk a bit about how you play out dynamics between characters, and how you just like preserve that complication?
Yeah. So like with that story, it was like a few things happening, which was, you know, there was class, there was ethnicity. So this is a character. So Chief is an Igbo man in Kano, which is mostly like basically a Hausa state. Awal is Muslim. Awal is poor. Chief is rich. And so like I know, you know, in interactions, language, we use language sort of like, languages can be an invitation, but it can also sort of be a battle. You know what I mean? Like, something used to strike people. And so for me, like when characters talk to one another, it's like, I try as much as possible to sort of like have that reflected, right? Same thing with, like, let's say a mother and a child, the way you speak English to your mom, right? So let's say, I know sometimes when I was a teenager, my mom would be like, do this, and if I didn't want to do it, I'm like, and she really wanted me to do it. I don't want to do this. So, I'm working out slow you go, because like, am I the one you're speaking English? Or like, you know what I mean? So it's like, so like that sort of that tension like always exists, like, you know, when characters interact. Like, language is very important to me. Also because like Nigeria is like it's multilingual, and also like the way even when two people are speaking the same language, the way like, you know, they communicate.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a cliche, right? Where people are like, oh, the setting was a character in this story, and I mean, like, yes, in some sense, but in a lot of ways, like, your stories, like, they're almost like these kind of like early Chekhovian plays where they could kind of be anywhere, where the sort of backdrop in terms of its detail is very spare, but you feel very much the pressure that these stories are unfolding in a particular place, in a particular social context, at a particular time. And I guess I wonder, like, was that important to you, like letting all the sort of context put pressure on these relationships? And I guess I wonder, like, what were some ways that you used to sort of make sure that you were letting the setting always sort of, I don't know, like, put pressure on the characters?
Yeah, I think for me, like, when I think of setting, like, it's also the way I think of just everything, which is realness. Like, I want as much as possible to depict it to feel real. So, like, I want to capture, and I think I want to capture like the streets and like the feeling of what it means to just walk down the street or like to live here. And like for my characters, like, you know, I love rain a lot. You know, I love when it rains. I love
Yes.
when so yeah, and it's so I, you know, when I also like want to write like those moments. So when my characters, for example, are, you know, in an intimate moment, and I sort of situate it in rainy weather, I feel yeah, this is good, because for me that's like that's ideal. Like when it rains and the air is cool, I just want to be indoors, like, you know, just like, so for me it's like what I'm imagining to be like the ideal, you know what I mean, in a certain like moments like of depiction.
Yeah, you love rain. Also light. I mean, there's so many moments in these stories where, I mean, and they're like these great like cinematic moments where the character is like smoking a cigarette on a balcony, looking at the light change. I'm like, yeah. Or like when they're like watching traffic sort of move around, like, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah,
I mean, there are these moments like where characters are just like having a cigarette or drinking or like being alone, thinking thoughts, and sometimes that can be like, in other hands that can be like very boring. But here it's like, I don't know, there's a whole atmosphere. It's all going toward tone and atmosphere, and I feel like that's one of your great gifts, like a real mastery of tone and feeling, and even these small little gestures feel so weighty because they often are your characters, you know, communicating something that they can't voice, right? And I love that. I love this sort of, I don't know, it reminds me sometimes of like great theater, where it's like, it's all in the way they lift that cigarette or light this. There's a lot of cigarettes in these stories of Arinze, and I love every single one of them. Thank you. I love a pointed ashing of a cigarette as well. I also feel like another sort of big totemic object in these stories is cars. Like, cars are so important because I guess they speak to agency, they speak to class, they speak to freedom, they speak to all these things. But I'm so curious about then your use of objects. Are you like thinking about that when you're picking an object, or are you just like writing the story and the objects are just the objects?
I think mostly the objects are just the objects. But when it comes to cars, when it comes to cars, yeah, like when you say like it's sort of like something that shows class, and yeah, so cars are important. And also like conversations that people have like in cars, especially at night, like that's usually conversations.
Of a kind of depth,
Of
yes.
a certain kind of depth, yeah. So yeah, that's why cars are also important.
Yes, you're right. There are so many scenes in which people are alone in cars at night, and I won't spoil it. You should read them. They're quite steamy. The things that Arinze does with cars, and I'm just thinking about that first story. Yeah, I mean, it's so. I'm so
but like,
distracted by Chief in that car.
Yeah, because like also because when you just mentioned the first story, I also remember like things happen on the road, right? And it's like I'm remembering like that scene where Chief's like moving with police officers. And, yeah, but not to spoil anything, but things happen on the road. It's also why cars are important.
Things happen on the road. So I feel like to sort of bring this back around to another of the subjects that I feel sort of is at the heart of this book, families are so crucial to these stories, both because families are where people are made. It's families often sort of determine so much about us and how we move through the world. I guess when you set out to sort of write the stories, do you have some sense of like the kind of families that these people come from, or are you trying to figure out where does this character come from? Who made them?
Like so like in depicting family, I think in many ways. Now I'm just thinking. In many ways, like in some of the families, I wanted to depict like aspects of my own family, just as a love note, right? But also, use. There's a bit of like agenda to it, which I hope like when people read the story in Nigeria, that they see like that I'm trying to also say that like there's a kind of love that is possible, right? Because I grew up like in a compound where we had parents who were beating their children and they called it love. We had parents who were verbally abusive to their children and they would call it love. And a lot of people actually believe that that is the way to love. Like there are a lot of people who are like my peers who are maybe raising children soon and believe that they have to like beat their children like off to. So like instead of representing various kinds of families and just like showing, how they say show don't tell. I hope that somebody reading it will be like, okay, I don't have to beat my child, right? But
wouldn't that be great?
That would be great. But I guess like that's what when I think of family, I think how I'm thinking of the different kind of parents I know, the different kind of siblings I know, and just like to depict as truthfully as possible, what the reality is.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Oh, Arinze, I just want to make sure that we're going to transition to audience questions in just a moment. So get those questions together. My final question for you, Arinze, that's sort of related to that is, this is a book very much about queer Nigerian men and what it is to be a queer Nigerian man and all the sort of many different facets and aspects to that. What did it feel like to write a book primarily for and about queer Nigerian men as a queer Nigerian man?
Wow, I don't know. Like it just feels like the fulfillment of like I just need to go back to the Arinze of like 15 years old and I'm like, hey, okay. Yeah, it feels absolutely amazing. It feels good. Yeah, because I hope like teenagers. Like the teenagers growing up back home now, like they're going to have books. They're going to have my book. They're going to have like there are several books coming out now on queer Nigerians. It's so exciting.
Yeah,
that's why.
it's beautiful, and yeah, it is just Incredible, what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Questions? I'm an instructor. I will wait. I have someone waiting outside. Yes.
So my question is, you said at one point you stopped showing your stories to your family, and I'm just wondering if you've let them see the book, or if you gave them any heads up about the content.
Yeah, so my mom knows what's in the book. She hasn't seen it yet. I'm going to mail a copy to her soon. She knows what it's about on Facebook. She's like, congratulations! Like, our parents back home, you know, they're like, is it bringing money? We're practical people.
Incredible. Love that. It's amazing how consistent things are across the diaspora. I love Black people. It's amazing. Any other questions? Yes.
It's such an exciting moment for African literature right now, and both in French and in English. And I'm wondering if you see your book, if you expect your book translated, and if you've had the opportunity to share it with some of the neighboring countries.
I think like there's some like translations in the works. But I don't know yet, so we'll see. Yeah.
Oh, it's exciting! A world literature! Any other questions? Yes.
I'm curious if you talk about how your writing changed since you came to the US. Living amongst the Americans.
That's such a good question. Yes, Arinze, how has it changed?
That's a thesis question. Yeah, I think my writing like in many ways like went more inward in terms of like, you know, like more introspective. And I guess that's like mostly a result of actually being away from home. And just like spending a lot of time in my head. You know, back home, especially during the pandemic. Like because back home would like there was always something happening. But like in America, away from everything, and I had just come out before relocating to Iowa. There were all these unresolved things, and they made me think a lot. And so I think in America, the writing became like deeply inside. Yeah.
That's so cute. I'm sorry, Arinze is my friend. I get very emotional. Any other questions? Yes.
I wanted to ask if spirituality or religion played any role in the book, in the stories that you wrote.
Sorry, what?
If spirituality or religion played any role in the stories you wrote.
Yeah, but so in this collection, like but just as an atmospheric thing, you know what I mean? Like, you know, these characters live in a country or in a street, or in a state or wherever, in a city where people go to church, people go to mosque, and it means something like for the way people live. But most of the characters are not necessarily spiritual, like religious, I would say. Yeah.
Hi, Arinze. I just wanted to ask, well, your characters, like, they're so gentle, and gentleness is really seen as a value and a strength in these stories, and it's so hopeful in that way that you can, you know, want love, as Brandon has said, and be soft, and the world will still love you back. But then you did say now that you've turned to the dark side, and that now you've seen what's out there. So, but I know tenderness is sort of, you know, an emotional project that you have, and the characters are certainly tender, and they make me feel very tender. And so, yeah, just how do you conceive of tenderness now? Now that the book has come out and you've been with these characters for a long time.
Yeah, you for that question. It's a bit complicated, right? I think so. There was a period where I was just like, what is love, and what is, like people are not nice, people are not kind, people are this, and like so just like all this anger, and I guess like with the book out now, and that's also something like before I came to New York for this particular mission, I was in Florida, and like I was mostly by myself, so, and like there was a lot of thinking and a lot of I was like, okay, I'm going to write this essay, and like in just like trying to remember things and going back, what I found is that like yes, there's like an abundance of selfishness, there's an abundance of like shallowness, but there's also an abundance of like of love, and there's an abundance of like, there are a lot of people who understand that. Like sometimes I go on Twitter, like and that's what like the pandemic did. Like when the pandemic isolates you, you spend a lot of time on Twitter. And I kept like looking at this. Like I would go on just a random post because I would see random people just like interacting with one another in a way that's just. It made me think of like my streets back home, but on Twitter, and it's like people who are just like so open, and people who are just so nice to each other, so warm to strangers. Like I guess like things like that keep reminding me of tenderness, because back home, like I would see those things in the streets, I would be like, I'll be reminded. And now Twitter is the thing. So like I go intentionally. I don't,
Wow.
You look for the tenderness and you find it.
You're gonna have to do like a demo on how to find it. That's the filter I want. I want that filter. Yes.
So I think it's quite interesting that we're having more Nigerian queer people that queer books, and we see Akweke, we see Romeo, we see Chibuye, we see you, and other awesome people, and now there's this corpus of queer Nigerian literature, and it's very, very interesting that we don't have to see queerness through the white lens anymore, but now we are seeing it through our streets, ourselves, and also through how it is in our environment. I mean, with criminalization, with this sneaky loving, with this hardship, the tenderness of it, and all of that. So listening to you today, I'm so happy that I am here, and for your own existence too, because I am Nigerian and I stay.
That is a wonderful answer.
Also, so I want to know if these stories are all part of yourselves, your experiences in Nigeria, in New York, in life. Because I've read one of your stories before, one of the short stories. I think it's like one collection or something like that. And the way you talk about love, the way you talk about blinder, the way you I see them in this story too, that's written down. Yeah. And it's very, very interesting that these similarities are seen in your stories. So, yes, do you think these stories are all part of you, or other people you've met, or they're just the general news you heard about queer people and you just create something marvelous out of it?
Thank you, Matthew. Matthew is an activist, and they do great work. But yeah, so it's a mix of a lot. So I remember, there's someone from like when it goes through it's a short story itself. When it was first published, a friend, like a classmate from secondary school, I had to go a classmate from secondary school, like had messaged me and was like, and then he said, wait, Arinze, what you wrote this character, and people actually think this other person is you, but we know that it's this other person that is us. And it is like, it's that thing we do where, so there are parts of the stories that are like, based on things that I feel or things that I've experienced. But like they're also, it's never presented as it happens, right? It's always you grow from life, you grow from things you hear, conversations with your mom in the kitchen. you take from there, like things that happen to like people I know, right? Friends and other people, acquaintances, and just, I guess like I would say that this is a story of like everybody's story, just like jumbled together, and a lot of like imagination as well. Yeah.
I love that. I have a story for you about being contacted out of the blue. Yes.
Yeah. As a Nigerian northern writer, how does it feel sort of writing, contributing to the Nigerian, African literature space, especially given how few, writers there are in northern Nigeria? Probably you or Nathan. I don't know who else, but like, especially given the dialectic is very different between the north and the south, and sort of the general, growing up in Kano where it's very, conservative and very religious in that sense. How do you sort of enter the space, or how do you think your work is sort of contributing to that conversation?
That's a very interesting question. I think my work will be in conversation with the work of like people like Helen Sabina, Zainab Akali, and those are writers that I know while I was growing up. Yeah. So there's like, and I hear what you say about like just sort of the in comparison to every other region in Nigeria, the north is still very. And I hope in the next few years, I'm sure it's going to change in the coming years. But yeah, so I am Igbo, and I grew up in the north, which is a certain northern experience, as you know. And all these writers these writers I've called like northerners by birth as well. So like for me, I guess I'm bringing a perspective, and I hope that perspective comes into conversation with other perspectives that want to actually have a conversation. That's what I want to say.
Yeah. I'm curious, as a queer Nigerian writer, what your perspective is on Black American queer literature, like specifically, like just I'm partially familiar with your work, granted, but like sort of thinking about the ways that across the diaspora or across Black ethnicities, how Black queer writers come into being. I'm curious if you see similarities in your experience as a queer writer and differences.
Yeah, I would say like when it comes to this, like I'm still getting educated in that. Yeah, it's still like part of like an ongoing education. I remember like Baldwin, like who is when the first story question and Broken Things was published, and people were like, oh, have you read Baldwin? I was like, I haven't. And then I read Giovanni's book because I kept asking. And I was, but I'm glad I did. And now I am a Baldwin baby. So, but yeah, just to answer your question, like I think it's an ongoing illustration for me. And, yeah, I would answer that question first.
Yeah, and I think it's a reciprocal, ongoing conversation. I mean, I don't think that I had read very much queer writing from across the Black diaspora. I certainly hadn't until I got to Iowa. And then suddenly, my second year, like this flotilla of Nigerians arrived. It was great. I was like, oh! I thought that this was just like a southern thing, but it's like a Nigerian thing. Oh,
once we were like, oh my god, Nigeria's on the red soil.
Yes! Yes! I was like, we have the same thing in Alabama, the red clay. So I think it's been, just from my own perspective, it's been an ongoing education in getting to read writers like Romeo and Arinze and Ifeakandu and our great friend Esther, who is a brilliant writer as well. Getting to read them was, I think, one of the net positives of that wacky Iowa experience. Was like, you don't think you're gonna get like an education like the Black diaspora in fictional literature, and then you go to Iowa and you're like, oh, this is where all the Nigerians are. I think that's time. Thank you guys. Thank you.
forget to buy our books. Arinze will be personalizing here. Thank you all so much for being here, and good night. Get home safely. Please come back to all of us.
Yeah, it's the best explosion ever. Do you like working with us so far? Yeah, we really love it.